You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do Mini. I am your host, Abraham.
And I'm your Shane.
Shane host.
Well, I'm doing the thing where it's less words, right? So it's a mini. So instead of, now I've added more words. It totally defeated the purpose.
Okay. Anyway, so this is our mini. We tackle short topic or small topics or topics in some capacity, and we talk about them really quickly. And let's jump into it. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Shane. I know you love to read. Do you ever look at your books and think that would probably make for really good fuel for a fire?
There was one book I did have that I thought that, but then I decided that was not a thing I was going to do because I don't believe in that. Even though I strongly disagree with Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, I feel the same. Yeah, me neither. However, the history and inventions of books is really fascinating. Like, it's really cool to talk about that, but that is definitely way beyond the scope of a mini conversation that we are planning to have today. Suffice it to say that books gave humans a way to essentially offload and store memories, recorded events, to expand our knowledge at an absolutely unprecedented rate, and also to preserve and spread culture.
Yes, it's really a wonderful invention. Now, as long as people have had the technology of proliferating knowledge and stories through books, other people have been setting those books on fire. And those people are not great people.
Generally speaking, for sure.
Generally speaking, of course.
All right, so let's just talk through what's going on here. Pretty much book burning is what it sounds like. It's setting books on fire, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, sometimes this has been done symbolically, but at least historically, the purpose of book burning was to actively eliminate the knowledge contained in that book so it could not be easily spread because it was no longer recorded.
Yeah, so in 213 BC, the Terracotta Emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, ordered a giant pile of books to be burned, which is, that sounds so sad.
Yeah, there was a lot of, like, anything that didn't prop up the propaganda of the government, of the kingdom and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Roman rulers burned books with unfavorable predictions about the future sometimes, or books that contained foreign cultures and traditions because they were trying to take over the entire world. As one of the people who had that ambition. Yep. But one thing to point out, and we'll get to this in a moment, but part of the reason this was so impactful is because making a book in the first place back at these times was really difficult. So there was often a single copy of a text that ever existed.
Yes.
Or maybe like a handful, like a couple of copies, because they were doing it by hand. Even when they had some kind of mechanical devices to help reproduce those, they were very unreliable, and mostly they couldn't. They could at best rely on ways of transferring ink to a second piece of paper, but they were still copying by hand. Yeah. So you might be able to get two books at the effort of one, not reliably and inconsistently used. So one single book that was produced, if that was burned, then everything contained in it was just permanently lost.
Yep, absolutely. Armies would frequently target libraries and books when conquering territories and would burn books and art of the invaded territory. A lot of times they're religious texts, specifically about the culture itself, because they were an invading army expanding an empire.
Famous example of this, the library at Alexandria was at the time most likely the most comprehensive library in the world with the largest assembly of human knowledge on the planet by like an enormous degree. Yeah. And thus it was targeted and burned down multiple times. It actually was the subject of many fires. But the largest, most well-known example of burning down the library at Alexandria was when Caesar burned down the library more comprehensively, destroying an estimated 700,000 or more texts containing knowledge of math, philosophy, architecture, and many other things.
And people wonder why Brutus stabbed him. You know?
That's what it was. He was like, my favorite book was in there.
My favorite book. I love Goosebumps. Yeah. Assuming that R.L. Stine existed back then. Now, the invention of the printing press in 1440 resulted in an unprecedented mass production of books that proliferated access to books so successfully that eliminating a text entirely became all but impossible. So it's very difficult to get rid of a text now because so many were able to be mass produced.
Yeah, many copies. In 1814, the British burned down the U.S. Library of Congress, destroying at least 3,000 volumes. Apparently, in response to this, one of the politicians whose name I'm forgetting, it was like one of the big ones, like Andrew Jackson or something, I don't know. But they donated a huge chunk of their own personal book library to help rebuild the Library of Congress afterward.
Oh, that's nice. Now, during World War II, Nazis specifically targeted literature and art as part of their campaign of destruction while claiming to be the victims of the Jews, which was a common strategy, claiming to be the victim while being the aggressor. That happens a lot in dictatorships and in totalitarian types of spaces. And so then you eliminate marginalized groups of people by starting with their culture, their texts, their important knowledge and information, and you keep the masses less educated.
Yeah, very commonly. That's actually a tactic in the more recent Russian-Ukrainian war of Russia, who is invading, shelling, firing upon, and started the entire campaign, who is then claiming to be the victim.
Yeah.
It depends, where they're at in the system, but that is definitely a very common strategy of, while you're aggressing, claiming to be the victim.
Yeah.
A really famous example, in 1933, the German Student Union, there's students now, they organized a book burning of anything considered un-German, including anything that dealt with liberalism, communism. If they were written by people who were believed to be enemies of Nazism or some way undesirable to Nazis, then they would burn their book, regardless of what the content was.
Yeah, it's so sad. Now, when Mao Zedong rose to power in China, he ordered the burning of any books that didn't support the Chinese propaganda that was being perpetuated at the time. So again, it's you see in these examples of places where, a government or somebody in power is trying to control the narrative. It doesn't sound familiar at all as somebody who lives in Florida.
Indeed. Something that does not go away. And we'll actually get to that a little bit. In 2012, Al-Qaeda Islamic extremists invaded Mali and Timbuktu and targeted priceless texts and rare manuscripts. Fortunately, there were some heroes who put themselves at great personal risk. They didn't risk their lives, and they were able to save over 350,000 manuscripts. So they were really incredible in their efforts.
Yeah. In 2021, in the U.S. state of Virginia, two conservative representatives, Robbie Abu-Ismail and Kirk Twigg, openly advocated for burning books that contain any language about sexuality, particularly if they referred to LGBTQ plus sexuality at all.
They actually were another one of these claiming to be the victims, because they were stating that these books were essentially perverted hypersexualization that was trying to influence the sexuality of their students. They weren't. Most of them simply contained characters who were a part of the LGBT community.
Right.
And so they are just openly advocating for book burning is a thing that's bad.
Yeah.
So
they're just bigots is what we should say. They're bigots.
Yeah, they're bigots. All right. Important thing, though, when we get to any one of these discussions is, but why, though?
Yeah, but why, though? So some people who were stranded somewhere probably burned books as fuel to stay warm or to cook food when they were desperate. We're not talking about them right now because they had their own struggles, and that's a unique context.
Yeah. Some graduating high school students might burn textbooks to celebrate the end of the semester. We're also not talking about them.
Yeah. Many have long understood that history is in the hands of people who record the history. And so when told by the victors are glorified and the conquered are either vilified or erased altogether.
Right. So before books were widely available and literacy was normal, burning a book could essentially permanently end dissemination of any information contained in that book.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially the end of a culture is yes. What happens. Now, once books were ubiquitous, book burnings became largely political or symbolic more than anything. However, books with relatively limited pressings can still be completely eliminated and many have tried in those spaces. However, even without trying to completely eliminate a book burning might effectively remove the availability of that text from the immediate geographical region. So even if it doesn't get rid of it entirely, it gets rid of it in that community, and that might be enough for the oppressors.
Exactly. Many of these book burnings were intended to control public thought and discourse by reducing access to ideas that differed from the propaganda of the people who were in power. So they're, again, just trying to control the narrative and get people to believe them and think what they think.
And this is true for religious institutions, too. They have been pretty favorable of destroying books. And when I say pretty favorable, I mean very favorable of destroying books to prevent the spread of other religions or content deemed inappropriate to the religion. And that's how you have the Gnostic books in the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that. They were attempted to be destroyed, but they are considered quote unquote extensions of the Bible. And that's why you have the story of the midwife who accidentally touched Mary's vagina and then her hand burned off, but then touched Jesus, the baby, and then her hand grew back. That is a story that was at one point in time in the Bible and is no longer in the Bible because that was just too much.
Wow.
But the dragons are there still. There's still dragons there.
Fair.
They also love burning books, the religious groups. They love burning books that question the church, ask questions that the church couldn't answer, or spread ideas that were opposed to religious ideology. See, Galileo Galilei.
Exactly. Those things that were deemed threatening.
Yes.
Another place where this commonly occurs is with fascist dictators. They like to burn books to commit what they call cultural genocide, which was the goal of Hitler, but also just to squash any dissenting ideas about their political ideologies. Anything that does not glorify their position is usually considered a threat and is therefore eliminated in the form of burning, which again may only remove it from that region. But if they can also control other flows of information, such as the internet and what types of things are allowed to exist in their region, and they control the media, for example, there's only state-run TV, and they have policies that prevent other ideas from getting out there, then it's very easy for them to control the narrative.
Yep, absolutely. So many book burners call themselves the victims, even when they are the aggressors, and outnumber the victims, as we mentioned before. A lot of times, the cause of the book burning is because of some attack on their way of life, when the truth is it's just they just don't like it and they want to get rid of it. So there's no such thing as an attack on the traditional American family. Just it's a book that exists, and it's perfectly fine, and it's doing no harm.
Now, on the flip side of this, because there is always a double side, and it's a little beyond the scope of what we intended to talk about today. I think it's a conversation for a future time, but what about those people who use books to deliberately spread misinformation, lies, and those sorts of problems? And so I think there's a sort of two-way street here to think about. Like, on the one hand, I think burning books is generally a bad idea. On the other, like, at what point does the dissemination of information that is actively leading to the destruction of our society, our democracy, our country, that is actively causing harm and people are getting hurt because of it, at what point does that make sense for someone to step in and say, like, look, we have to draw a line somewhere?
Yeah.
Maybe that doesn't exist. Maybe there is no line. And I think that's the libertarian view, is like there should just be more speech. Although I think you could counter by pointing out that, well, everything's completely siloed, so the speech doesn't go anywhere. Like, you could put out all the speech in the universe that you possibly could, and it still will not affect those people who are being manipulated.
Right.
Anyway, bigger conversation, not what we're going to talk about. I think, yeah, most of the time, if you're burning books, you're probably a fascist piece of shit.
I agree with that sentiment.
Anything I'm missing here, Shane?
Nope, I think that covers it. I mean, I think book burning sucks. I think book banning sucks. As somebody who, like, I had historically had Ayn Rand books, which I have grown away from that, obviously, and then, Jordan Peterson books that I had gotten, I'd been gifted. Like, I felt bad donating them because I didn't want anybody else to get them, but I still have them. I won't destroy them.
Yeah.
But, I definitely won't give them away either.
That's fair. Books are knowledge. I think we can't necessarily use the same playbook as the people who are oppressors. So,
yep, exactly.
Another strategy is needed. Well, I think that we'll leave you without. This is Abraham.
This is Shane.
Why we do what we do. Minnie is out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.